my daughter-in-law whispered to my son. "Don't invite your mother. She will just complain about everything." So they packed for their cruise without telling me. No explanation, no consideration. They assumed I would sit quietly and accept it. Instead, I reclaimed my home, changed every lock, and refused their panicked calls. Now they are sleeping in their car, begging to return. But before we dive in, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about family boundaries. And tell me in the comments what state you are watching from. Thank you. I was arranging my medication organizer when I overheard it. "Grandma will not find out, right?" my grandson Tyler whispered from the hallway, his voice carrying that guilty tone children use when they know they are part of something wrong. I froze, pill bottle trembling in my arthritic hands. My fingers gripped the plastic container tighter as I stood motionless. Tyler's mother, Rachel, responded immediately, her voice sharp and dismissive. "Don't mention it again. I already told your father she is staying home." Period. She never said my name directly. She never had to. I remained perfectly still in my kitchen, my heart racing like it used to when I would catch my late husband sneaking extra salt on his dinner, despite his blood pressure medication. But this time, it wasn't something harmless or endearing. This time, it cut deep. Later that evening, after the dinner plates were washed and Tyler had finished his homework upstairs, I asked my son David casually while he scrolled through his tablet. "So when exactly do you folks leave for the cruise?" He avoided eye contact completely. He tapped his screen mindlessly and muttered. Rachel figured maybe this year it would be better if it was just the immediate family. Less complicated, you know. He delivered it like he was reading the weather forecast. I nodded slowly, maintaining my composure, even forcing a understanding smile. I didn't press for details. I didn't ask about the cabin arrangements, the ports they would visit, or whether they would remember to pack seasickness medication. I simply walked to the living room and stared at the framed photograph on the mantel, one from their last vacation where I had volunteered to take the picture, so I wouldn't have to explain why I wasn't in it. That night, I didn't shed a tear, not because the betrayal didn't wound me, but because the pain felt too familiar, too expected, like a bruise that never quite healed. I slept restlessly. I lay in my bedroom listening to them pack suitcases in the guest room down the hall, hearing Rachel snapping at little Emma to fold her clothes properly, hearing David asking where they would put the travel documents. They moved through the house like I was invisible furniture they would forgotten to dust around. The following morning, Rachel gave me a patronizing smile and said, "Thanks for house-sitting while we are gone, Maggie," as they wheeled their luggage toward the front door. David couldn't meet my eyes. Tyler waved reluctantly from the back seat of their minivan. I waved back from the doorway. Then I secured every lock behind them, turned around, and stood in my suddenly quiet house. I walked directly to the antique secretary desk in the corner, the one my late husband Harold had always insisted I keep organized. Inside the bottom drawer was the property deed, paper slightly yellowed with age, but my name still clearly printed in permanent black ink. Margaret Elizabeth Thompson. Only my name. I actually laughed out loud. It was brief and bitter, and startled even me. They genuinely believed they could exclude me from my own home, like I was some unwelcome relative overstaying her visit. I sat down in the same wooden chair where David used to struggle with his algebra homework 30 years ago. I surveyed the room. Everywhere I looked were traces of their presence. Their photographs, their cheap decorative accessories, Rachel's irritating motivational plaques in the kitchen that proclaimed family first and love lives here. But love hadn't prevented them from abandoning me. Fear hadn't, shame hadn't, simple selfishness had. I was inconvenient to them. I was the imperfection in their carefully curated family image. I was the reminder that they hadn't earned this comfortable life independently, that their picture-perfect family was supported by someone they couldn't be bothered to include. I didn't feel vengeful. I didn't feel furious. I felt finished. That evening, I contacted a locksmith. I removed Rachel's saccharine wall decorations and deposited them in the garbage. I opened every window and allowed fresh air to circulate through the house. Then, I drew a hot bath, put on my most comfortable robe, and enjoyed a glass of wine in the living room. I stared at the front door as if challenging them to attempt entry again. They were unaware of it yet, but something fundamental had changed. I was no longer waiting for their approval or inclusion. I was no longer going to remain silent about being treated as invisible. I was present. I was the homeowner, and I was finished pretending this house belonged to anyone else. The house felt different that morning, but not peacefully different. More like a room immediately after someone storms out and slams the door. I sat on the edge of my bed, listening to the muffled sounds of suitcases being closed, wheels rolling across hardwood floors, the gentle thuds of dresser drawers being opened and shut. Nobody spoke my name. Nobody asked if I wanted breakfast or needed anything. I heard Rachel talking loudly to the children, giving instructions about phone chargers and entertainment for the flight, while David moved around quietly, his voice barely audible beneath her commanding tone. I remained upstairs until I heard the front door open and close. Then came the scraping of luggage wheels across the concrete walkway. When I finally came downstairs, the living room was already partially cleared, stripped of the usual clutter they left scattered around. Rachel was adjusting straps on their roof cargo carrier, calling for Emma to hurry up and get in the car, while David stood awkwardly on the lawn holding a travel bag like he wasn't sure where to put it. He glanced up and noticed me through the screen door, but didn't wave or acknowledge me. I opened the door slowly, leaned against the doorframe, and offered a small smile as if everything was perfectly normal. "Have a wonderful time," I said clearly. Rachel turned and flashed, that artificial polite expression she always used when she needed something from me. "Thanks again for staying behind and keeping an eye on everything. We will send photos." I nodded, then added deliberately, "I will take excellent care of the place." She gave a tight laugh, said something to David I couldn't hear clearly, and climbed into the driver's seat. Emma waved half-heartedly from the rear window. I stood on the porch and watched them drive away like a neighbor, watching strangers leave a block party. As their taillights vanished around the corner, I walked inside and secured every lock, deadbolt, chain lock, doorknob lock. I went into the kitchen and removed Rachel's decorative chalkboard from the wall, the one that proclaimed family means no one gets left behind. I stared at that phrase for a full 15 seconds before dropping it directly into the trash bin without hesitation. I didn't want a single item in this house that pretended to value me when the people who placed it there clearly didn't. I moved through each room slowly, touching every surface as if I were erasing their fingerprints. I passed David and Rachel's bedroom, the door slightly ajar. Bed hastily made, a bottle of her expensive perfume still sitting on the dresser. I closed the door gently. I didn't want to see any more of their belongings today. In the hallway closet, I located the file folder I was looking for, edges worn with age, thick with important documents. My name was written on the front in Harold's careful handwriting. I sat down at the kitchen table and opened it slowly, my heart already preparing for what I knew I would find. There it was, the house deed, sole owner, Margaret Elizabeth Thompson, not David, not Rachel. Just me. I leaned back and stared at that document, like it was a map I hadn't consulted in years. I would forgotten how much authority my own signature carried. Harold and I had purchased this house with cash after his promotion to plant supervisor. We would raised 3 children in it. I would prepared every meal here, celebrated every holiday, bandaged every scraped knee, hosted every birthday party. Yet somehow, over time, they would begun acting like it belonged to them. Like I was a guest, like they were doing me a favor by allowing me to live in a place I would built from nothing. I stood up slowly, took the deed, and walked to my bedroom. I slid it into the fireproof safe at the bottom of my closet, the one nobody else ever accessed. Then I took my purse, drove to the hardware store, and purchased new locks for every entrance: front door, back door, side entrance, and garage. The young man at the register asked if I needed installation assistance. I told him, "I have been fixing things longer than you have been walking." By sunset, every key they possessed was useless. I threw the old locks in the garbage along with Rachel's chalkboard. That night, I sat on the back deck with a cup of chamomile tea and watched the last daylight fade from the yard. For the first time in years, The house felt like it was breathing with me instead of despite me. No shouting, no doors slamming, no television blaring over my head, just me and the silence. I wasn't planning revenge. I wasn't angry anymore, but I was finally conscious of something I would been blind to for years. They didn't see me as family anymore, so I stopped pretending I was. The next morning, I woke at 6 from habit, but the silence was so complete it felt like it embraced me. No heavy footsteps from upstairs. No Rachel yelling for someone to bring down a phone charger. No cartoons blasting from the living room television. I stood in the hallway for a moment, barefoot, realizing I hadn't experienced peace like this in years. It wasn't just quiet. It was pure, undisturbed, like the house had finally relaxed. I brewed a full pot of coffee, real ground coffee, not the cheap instant powder Rachel always bought to save money. I poured it into my china cup, not the disposable travel mugs they constantly used, and sat at the table without hurrying. Every sip tasted like ownership. After breakfast, I went through every room with a large trash bag and began removing the life they would constructed around me. The cheap decorative signs Rachel had bought that said live, laugh, love, and home is where the Wi-Fi connects. All of them went into the bag. The mail basket overflowing with credit card advertisements and grocery store coupons they never organized. Gone. The artificial fruit arrangements in decorative bowls. The mismatched throw pillows that clashed with everything. I discarded the bathroom rug with the wine stain she would never bothered cleaning. Then I walked into what used to be my sewing room, but had become a storage area for their unopened Amazon packages and forgotten purchases, and I started dragging everything to the garage. I wasn't even upset. I just felt relieved, like every item I removed gave the house back a little more of its dignity. I opened windows in every room, allowing fresh air to flow through, and for the first time in ages, I didn't feel like I was walking on eggshells in my own home. Around noon, I made a sandwich and ate it in the living room with my feet up on the coffee table. No coasters, no commentary. I texted my friend Dorothy and asked if she wanted to come over for wine that evening, and she responded with a laughing emoji and absolutely. At 4 of the clock, I drove to the grocery store and bought a bottle of Merlot, crackers, and that expensive aged cheese I never used to purchase because someone would always complain it was too strong. Not today, when Dorothy arrived just after 5. She looked around and said, "You have been redecorating." I handed her a glass and said, "I have been reclaiming." We sat outside on the deck, where the children usually left soccer balls scattered, and I told her everything. The cruise, the whispered conversation I would overheard, the lock changes. She didn't interrupt, just sipped wine, nodded, and stared at me like she was seeing a different version of the person she would known for decades. "Finally," she said, "you finally reached your limit." I smiled and shook my head. No, I finally stopped swallowing my pride. After she left, I rinsed the glasses, wiped the counters, and walked slowly through the house. Every room I passed was organized, not because I would cleaned it for someone else's approval, but because I would chosen to do it for myself. No waiting for permission. No stepping around other people's messes. I ended up in the living room and sat down in Harold's old recliner. The one David used to pretend was a rocket ship when he was 7. I ran my hand over the worn armrest, thinking how far removed that innocent boy was from the man who allowed me to be discarded like spoiled food. I wasn't bitter. I was awake. That night, I went to sleep with the doors secured, the deed safely stored where nobody could access it, and a quiet confidence inside me that I hadn't felt since the day I signed the mortgage papers. This is my house, not theirs, not shared, not negotiable. Mine. 4 days later, they returned. I knew the moment the motion sensor light activated outside, and the familiar rumble of the minivan engine approached the driveway. I didn't move from my seat in the back room. I had been working on a crossword puzzle, something I hadn't done in months, the rhythm of pencil on paper keeping my hands steady while my heart waited. I heard the car doors opening, one after another, followed by voices, confused, exhausted, irritated. The key jingled in the front door lock. A few quiet clicks, then the rattle of the handle being tested. Again, more forcefully, then silence. I waited. David knocked once. Nothing aggressive. Just a slow tap, like he was still hoping it was a mistake. "Mom?" he called, almost hesitant. I didn't respond. I sat perfectly motionless. "Mom?" "It is us," he tried again. Louder this time. "Something's wrong with the lock." I let another moment pass before I stood, quiet as a whisper, and walked to the kitchen window. I peered through the curtain just enough to see Rachel pacing with her arms crossed, mouthing something sharp to David, who was already pulling out his phone. He called. I watched my phone illuminate from across the room. I didn't touch it. He left a voicemail. Then another. Then I heard the children's voices, Tyler asking if Grandma was upset, little Emma crying about needing to use the bathroom. Rachel was at full volume now, snapping at David. She changed the locks. "Are you serious?" David tried the handle one more time, then walked toward the garage. That entrance had been replaced too. I watched him try the side door, his shoulders drooping lower with each failed attempt. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Then the engine started again. I watched the taillights disappear down the street, the same way I had a week ago. Only this time they weren't departing for paradise. This time they had nowhere to go. I sat back down, heart pounding, not from fear, but from something more powerful. Certainty. I was finished being invisible. Later that night, around 11 of the clock, my phone buzzed again. An unknown number. I didn't answer, but the voicemail arrived immediately. David's voice, strained, quiet, embarrassed. "Hey, we are at the Budget Inn on Route 9, just for tonight. I will try calling again tomorrow. Maybe we can discuss this then." I saved the voicemail but didn't reply. The next morning, I took a walk through the house. The sunlight was hitting the dining room just right, illuminating the hardwood floors I would refinished by hand the previous spring. Everything was clean, everything was peaceful, it was mine. Around noon, I went to the utility room and retrieved a screwdriver. I took the old family portrait off the wall, the one with Rachel's forced smile and my face squeezed at the edge like I would been added as an afterthought, and carefully removed the backing. I slid the photograph out, folded it in half, and threw it in the trash. Then I replaced it with a picture of just Harold and me on our wedding day, standing in front of this very house when we first bought it. I hung it back in the same spot. Let them notice the change. Let them remember who provided them this home to begin with. That evening, I poured myself another glass of wine and sat on the front porch. I stared out at the yard, at the flower garden I used to maintain before Rachel decided she didn't like messy plants, at the painted garden gnome Tyler had decorated when he was 7 before she called it tacky and hid it behind the shed. I had retrieved it and placed it prominently by the front steps. Let them see everything they would pushed aside. Let them feel the absence of their own entitlement. The porch light came on as the sun dropped low, and I remained there in the cool evening air. My phone silent beside me. They were out there somewhere, probably crowded into a cramped motel room with flickering fluorescent lights and thin towels, wondering how I could be so heartless. But it wasn't heartlessness. It was clarity. They had drawn the line first. I just built the fence to match. By the third day of silence, the calls started changing in tone. David had left 4 voicemails the first night, all of them carefully polite, each more desperate than the last. By day 2, Rachel had taken control. Her voice on the voicemail was clipped and condescending. Really mature. "Margaret, locking your own family out of their home? Hope that makes you feel important." I deleted that message without a second thought. On the 5th day, an envelope arrived, not from them, but from a local law firm. A formal request for mediation regarding residential property disputes, with Rachel's name typed neatly at the top. I read it once, then again, and let out a breath so sharp it surprised me. They were trying to make it legal, claim ownership of what wasn't theirs. I didn't call anyone. I didn't get agitated. I went straight to the locked filing cabinet in the laundry room, the one behind the old vacuum and ironing board, where Harold used to keep every receipt, record, and document since the 1970s. I pulled out the heavy bottom drawer, searched through folders, until I found the thick manila one labeled property. I carried it to the kitchen table, sat down, and opened it slowly. Like removing a bandage, you know will be painful. The first several pages were familiar. The original deed, current tax records, maintenance receipts, all bearing my name, clean, clear, indisputable. Then, toward the back, wedged behind a property tax statement from 2 years ago, I discovered something I didn't recognize. A printed email exchange from David's account, dated just 8 months ago. It was a forwarded conversation between him, Rachel, and a real estate agent named Patricia. The subject line made my blood run cold: potential listing, summer timeframe. I read every word. Rachel had inquired whether the house could be listed above market value since it had been in the family for generations. David responded that once everything is officially transferred to our name, they would like to relocate to Florida and purchase something larger. The agent confirmed she would conduct a complete market analysis in June. I stared at the date. June, just 2 months away. They weren't just ignoring me, they were planning to erase me. Not accidentally. Not in a moment of frustration, but through paperwork behind my back, while they still smiled at me across the dinner table and allowed me to do their laundry. That was the moment I stopped questioning anything I would done. I went to my bedroom, retrieved the original deed again, and placed it beside the email. I photographed everything and uploaded the images to my online storage, just in case. Then I picked up the phone, called the attorney listed in their letter, and calmly informed the receptionist. This is Margaret Thompson. I would like to submit documented proof of full ownership before any mediation takes place. I emailed the files while still on the phone. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't panic. I just made it irrefutable. That evening, the calls from David resumed. "Mom, I think there has been a misunderstanding," he said in one message. "Rachel didn't mean to file anything without consulting you first. Can we just talk?" I didn't respond. At sunset, I walked to the kitchen, opened the drawer where Rachel kept her collection of home improvement magazines, and threw the entire stack into the trash. I grabbed a lighter, ignited one magazine at the edge, and dropped it into the fire pit outside. I watched it curl and blacken. Then I added the email printout. I didn't need it anymore. I had made my point. Let them try to sell a house they don't own. Let them explain to the children why they are sleeping in a motel instead of the bedrooms I painted by hand. Let them sit with the truth for once. They weren't pushed out. They were never entitled to stay. It was the middle of the 5th night when I found it, wedged between the couch cushions, buried so deep I wouldn't have noticed if I hadn't dropped the television remote. A bright purple phone case with a cracked screen protector and a faded sticker of a cartoon unicorn. Emma's tablet. My granddaughter must have left it here in the confusion, and somehow none of them realized. I held it in my hands for a moment, thinking of how many times Rachel had scolded her to put it away. How often she would sat on that very couch watching videos while I folded laundry nearby. I considered turning it off and leaving it on the front porch for them to collect. But then it chimed softly. A new voice recording. My finger hesitated for a second, then tapped it open. The file had been recorded the morning they left. The title said, "For Grandma." I sat down and pressed play. Her small voice came through clearly, like she was holding the device too close, whispering so nobody would overhear. "Hi, Grandma. I don't know if you will ever hear this, but I wanted you to come with us." I asked if you could. Mom said no, and Dad didn't say anything. I don't understand why. My throat tightened immediately, the kind of pain that starts deep in your chest and crawls up your neck. She paused in the recording, breathing softly, like she was trying not to cry. "I don't think it is fair. You always make me French toast when Mom forgets breakfast. You always read to me before bed. I don't know why you had to stay home." Then there was silence. 10 seconds. 15. I thought it had ended, but then she added, barely audible, "I wish you were coming with us." The recording stopped. I sat there, holding that tablet like it weighed 1,000 pounds. That sweet, innocent voice from a child who understood more than the adults gave her credit for had just shattered the last bit of doubt I would been carrying. Rachel hadn't just excluded me. She had lied about it to everyone else, including her own daughter. She spun it, like I didn't want to join them. Like it was easier without Grandma. Like she was protecting their vacation when really she was just erasing me from their story. And David let her. Worse, he helped her write it. I placed the tablet on the coffee table and stared at it for a long time. I thought about calling Emma, telling her thank you. But I knew Rachel probably monitored the device or had parental controls activated. I wasn't about to give her another excuse to twist this into something. It wasn't. Instead, I found a piece of stationery and wrote Emma a letter. Just a few lines. I heard your message. I love you. You did nothing wrong. I will always be here when you need me. Love, Grandma. I folded it carefully, slipped it into an envelope, and taped it to the back of the tablet case. The next morning, I placed the tablet in a padded envelope and mailed it to the motel address David had mentioned in his first voicemail. No return address, just my handwriting, neat and careful. That night, I sat by the fire pit again, the cold air sharp against my skin, and watched the flames dance under the dark sky. I reached into the box where I would store the last printed copy of that email conversation, the one I hadn't burned yet, and finally dropped it into the fire. It curled up quickly, the ink dissolving before the paper even turned to ash. It wasn't for evidence anymore. I had already proven enough. This was about releasing what they had planned and focusing on what I still possessed. A voice, a name on the deed, and a granddaughter who still remembered who I was, even if her parents tried to rewrite the story. Let them stay in the motel another night. Let them explain to their children why Grandma will not answer the door. I wasn't hiding. I was home. It was nearly 3 in the morning when the knocking came. Not loud or frantic, just slow and deliberate. 3 soft taps, like someone trying not to wake the entire neighborhood. I sat up in bed instantly, my heart racing, every instinct on high alert. I didn't turn on the lights. I walked barefoot to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to see who it was. David alone, standing there in an old college sweatshirt, hair disheveled, shoulders slumped forward like a scolded child. No Rachel, no children, just him and whatever guilt he would finally decided to confront. I stood there for a full minute, letting the silence stretch long enough to be uncomfortable. Then I unlocked the deadbolt and opened the door just a few inches. He didn't speak immediately. He looked smaller somehow, like something inside him had collapsed. I didn't know where else to go, he said finally. Voice hoarse, Rachel left. She took the kids and went to her mother's house. Said she is finished. Blamed me for everything. He rubbed his face, and I could see the dark circles under his eyes, even in the dim porch light. I am not asking to move back in. I just needed to see you. I didn't move. Didn't open the door wider. I stared at him, like I was trying to see past the man he would become, and find even a glimpse of the boy who used to bring me dandelions from the yard after school. You allowed her to do this to me, I said quietly. Matter-of-factly. He nodded without argument. I did. The way he said it, no defense, no excuse, broke something I didn't know was still fragile inside me. I opened the door just enough to let the cool air in. The house isn't open, I said. But the garage has a working heater and a folding cot. There is blankets in the storage chest. It locks from the inside. He looked like he wanted to say thank you, but thought better of it. He just nodded, stepped back into the darkness, and made his way toward the garage. I watched from the window as he opened the door, paused a moment like he was accepting his humiliation, then stepped inside. I stood there in the dark for a long time, arms crossed, jaw clenched so tight it ached. This wasn't victory. This wasn't revenge. This was a grown man who had allowed his wife to push his mother out of her own home and was now facing the complete consequences of what he would permitted. I knew Rachel wouldn't return. That type of woman doesn't stay when things become difficult. She preferred control. The minute she lost it, she ran. But I also knew David would have to live with the silence she left behind. Around 6 in the morning, I made a fresh pot of coffee and poured 2 cups. One for me, one for him. I opened the back door and walked to the garage, knocking twice before I entered. He was sitting on the folding cot, wrapped in an old quilt from the guest bedroom, eyes red and exhausted. I handed him the cup without speaking, and he accepted it with both hands, like it might slip if he wasn't careful. We sat there for several minutes, not saying a word, just letting the warmth fill the space between us. Finally, he spoke. I should have stopped it, a long time ago. I just kept telling myself, you were okay with everything. That you didn't mind. I looked directly at him. That is what made it worse. He swallowed hard. I didn't protect you. And you always protected me. I didn't offer comfort. I didn't say it was acceptable. I let the truth sit there between us, heavy and raw and deserved. You don't get the house, I said. You don't get a room. But you get this moment. One night to understand what you threw away. He nodded, slowly, eyes on the floor. I will sleep in my car tomorrow. I stood up, finished my coffee, and walked out. I didn't look back. I didn't have to. That was the first night in years my son saw me clearly. Not as a background figure, not as the automatic caretaker, but as the woman who had given him everything and finally taken it back. The next morning, I didn't check to see if he was still there. I didn't hover or peek out the window like some soft-hearted mother trying to smooth things over. I poured my coffee, made toast, and sat at the kitchen table like it was any ordinary day. Around 10, I heard the garage door open. David stepped onto the driveway slowly, like someone who wasn't sure they were still allowed to be visible. He didn't knock. He just stood there for a moment, hands in his pockets, then finally walked away. I watched him from the side window, his figure getting smaller down the driveway with no luggage, no dramatic exit, nothing. He looked like a man who had finally run out of versions of the story where he was the victim. I thought that was the end of it. I assumed he would go crawl back to Rachel, beg her to come home. Try to rewrite the past with a few apologetic gestures, but that afternoon I heard his car return. He didn't get out immediately. I walked to the porch and leaned on the railing, waiting. When he finally stepped out, he wasn't carrying bags or making excuses. He was holding an old photo album, one I hadn't seen in years. I found it in the garage, under the Christmas decorations, he said. Voice quiet but steady. I didn't say anything. I opened it to a picture of the 4 of us at the county fair, back when he was maybe 10. Harold was holding the camera. In the photo, David's face was chocolate-smeared and grinning, and I was behind both children, arms around their shoulders, all of us laughing. You used to sit with us after dinner and make us tell you 3 things we learned that day, he said. I used to think it was annoying, but now I understand it. You were teaching us to pay attention. He looked up at me, eyes clearer than I would seen in years. I didn't just let Rachel push you out, I needed her to. Because you reminded me who I used to be, and I couldn't face how far I would let that slip. I crossed my arms, and now, he let out a slow breath. Now I am not sure who I am anymore. But I don't want to keep pretending you were the problem. You weren't. You were just inconvenient to the version of my life I thought I was supposed to create. I stared at him, trying to determine if this was another performance. Another guilt-soaked half-apology looking for a quick resolution. But something in his expression had shifted, less defensiveness. More quiet devastation. I am staying at a friend's place for a few weeks, he added. Rachel's not coming back, she said. I had to choose between being her husband or being your son. And I finally realized I never stopped being your son. I just started acting like someone else's. I didn't cry. I didn't reach out or rush to embrace him. I just said, I am not interested in starting over. I am interested in starting honestly. He nodded. That is fair. I took the photo album from his hands and flipped through a few pages, tracing the faces of people I would once fought so hard to keep under one roof. You can visit, but you will not live here. This house isn't your safety net, I said firmly. He didn't argue. I know. I don't want the house anymore. I just want you to know, I remember what it felt like when we were good, and I want to get back there if you will let me. I closed the album, walked past him into the house, and left the door open, not wide. Just enough. That night, I made dinner for one, but I set out 2 place settings. Not because I expected company, but because I would spend enough nights setting the table for people who didn't see me. This time, I would decide who sat across from me, and why. 3 weeks passed before I heard from David again. He didn't call or text. He just appeared late one afternoon. In a different car, a used sedan that looked like it had seen better years. When he stepped out, he was wearing a clean shirt, hair combed, and holding a thin envelope. I met him on the porch, not with suspicion, but with the kind of stillness that comes from finally having nothing left to lose. "It is finished," he said, handing me the envelope. I opened it and saw the words I never expected to read in real life. Final decree of dissolution of marriage. Rachel had signed. He had signed. It was official. She is staying with her mother in Arizona, he said. Wants a complete break. Says the children can visit, once things are settled. I didn't know what to say to that. Not because I wanted her back in his life, but because it was surreal to watch the entire life he would built with her dissolve like that. I am not asking for sympathy, he added quickly, reading my expression. Just wanted you to know it is official, and not because she forced me to choose, because I saw what choosing her cost me. I nodded, but the emotion in my chest didn't soften. It sat heavy and uncertain. Where are you living now? I asked. Friend's apartment above his garage, he said. It is small but clean. Has a kitchenette. Decent shower. I even cook sometimes. Burned spaghetti last night. For the first time in a long time, I smiled. Not because of the spaghetti, but because he sounded like someone who was rebuilding from scratch, not just patching holes in a collapsing structure. I found a place for the kids too, he added. Alternate weekends. Court gave me temporary custody until we finalize everything. Tyler asked if he could come see you. I told him I would ask. I felt something stir. Then, quiet, careful hope. But I didn't reach for it yet. You can bring him by, I said, but no sleepovers, and you are here with him the entire time. Of course, he said, like he didn't expect anything else. And just so you know, I am not planning to move back in. I understand now. This house was never mine to reclaim, but I have been saving money. I am hoping to get my own place by winter. Thought maybe you would help me pick out furniture. That caught me off guard. Furniture, something so simple, so domestic, but it landed heavily. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I stepped back into the house and came out with a box I would been meaning to donate, full of old kitchen items and duplicates I never used. Take these, I said. You will need them. He opened the box, saw the can opener. The extra measuring cups, a chipped mug with a lighthouse on it. He picked up the mug and stared at it for a moment. This was Dad's favorite, he said. I didn't say anything. I just watched him tuck it carefully back into the box, like it was something precious. As he left, I didn't feel proud or vindicated. I felt tired. Like something deep in my chest had finally stopped bracing for impact. That night, I stood in the guest room, the one Rachel had turned into a closet with her clothes and shoes and mirrors, and looked at the empty walls. I decided to paint it, soft blue. Something calming, not for anyone else. Just for me. I wasn't rebuilding my family. I was recentering my life, one room at a time. It was Christmas morning when I finally opened the door to the sound of laughter that didn't hurt. David pulled up in his car with Tyler and Emma, their arms full of mismatched gift bags, grocery sacks, and a slightly lopsided pie box. I stood at the door in my new red cardigan, the one I would bought last week just for this occasion, and let them in without ceremony. No speeches, no grand reunions, just quiet footsteps on floors that no longer required tiptoeing. Tyler dropped his backpack and hugged me like he hadn't seen me in years. And for him, maybe it felt that way. Grandma, you baked cookies, right? He asked, before even removing his jacket. I nodded and pointed toward the kitchen, where the smell of gingerbread still lingered in the air. David followed behind, more cautious but more present than I would seen in a long time. "We didn't want to overwhelm you," he said. "Just a simple dinner. Thought it would be good to start something new." I didn't reply. I just walked to the dining room, turned on the lights, and revealed the small table I would set. 4 places, simple food, nothing elaborate. I would always done too much before. This time, I did only what felt right. As we ate, David told me about the children's new school arrangements, the books Tyler was reading, how he would started volunteering once a week at a senior center. He didn't say it out loud, but I knew it was his way of making amends, not with grand gestures, but through the quiet act of showing up. Tyler handed me a homemade card that said "Best Grandma Ever" in thick marker. I placed it next to the small centerpiece I would made from pine cones and ribbon. After dinner, while the children played a card game in the corner, David helped me wash dishes. We didn't talk much, just moved side by side like we used to before. Everything got complicated. At one point, he looked up and said, "I finally bought furniture, a blue sofa with yellow pillows. I remembered you saying brown is depressing." I smirked. "It is." Then he added, "The mugs on the kitchen counter. I use it every morning." I paused at the sink, hands soapy, heart fuller than I would admit. I nodded once and handed him another plate. Before they left, Tyler asked if he could come back next week. "I want to help you plant new flowers. The garden looks empty." I smiled. "Bring your own gloves." As they walked out, I noticed David pause at the door, his eyes catching the new sign I would hung above the kitchen doorway. It was made of reclaimed barnwood, painted soft white, and it read "This house remembers." He didn't comment, just stared for a moment too long, before giving me a quiet goodnight. I locked the door behind them, turned off the lights, and stood alone in the living room. The silence didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt earned. Not the absence of people, but the presence of peace. I walked through the house slowly, running my fingers along the walls. The furniture, every corner that now felt like mine again, not because I took it by force, but because I finally stopped giving it away. I made a cup of tea, sat in Harold's old chair, and watched the tree lights twinkle in rhythm. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for someone to notice me. I didn't need to be the fixer, the peacekeeper, or the person who lets everything slide to keep others comfortable. I was the woman who owned this house, the one who stayed quiet when it mattered and spoke up when it counted, and I was no longer invisible. I was home, under my roof, by my rules, forever. If you enjoyed this story about setting boundaries and reclaiming your worth, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more content about family dynamics and life lessons. What would you have done in Margaret's situation? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to check out my other videos about standing up for yourself and creating healthy relationships. Thanks for watching.